Hey guys, and welcome to Top Channel 1-on-1. So today we're going to be making this imploding planet VFX shot in Blender. Let's jump right in. Project files are going to be in the description on my Gumroad page, Patreon, and YouTube membership. Yeah, so you can see we have a planet, we have different layers, and yeah. The first thing I'm going to do is fracture the Earth and then implode it so that it can collapse into itself, and then we can layer multiple effects on top of that. So we're going to use cell fracture to fracture this. So I'm just adding a sphere and fracturing it. Let's say the more pieces, the better. But for the case of tutorial, I'm going to use 1,000 pieces and add some noise. And you can have this in a collection called C or whatever you want. And I'll set up a new material. Actually, let me do it here. I want a material for the outside and another one for the inside, just like that. So we can go back to cell fracture and make sure that you set material for the inside and everything else. Hit OK. So if for whatever reason when you try to fracture, the sphere just turns into a cube, it seems there is a bug in Blender 4.0 that doesn't fracture circles very well. So I'm just going to copy this sphere and open up Blender 3.6 and do the fracturing from there. Quick effects, so fracture, yeah, set a material, hit OK. And now we have our sphere fractured. I don't need this here, I just need these fractures. So I'm just going to copy everything here and just paste it into my original file. Set up a collection, call it C1, and we have our fractures. I can even hide this into a backup collection, and we can go to geometry nodes to set up our collapsing. I'm just going to add a plane, new geometry nodes, and bring in my collection, which is C1. If I look at that, this is how it looks. Make sure this is set to separate and add a simulation zone, just like this. Connect this to this and the rest to that. If we hit play, nothing happens. Now we are also going to add an object here. Let me just use a subdivided cube, just like this, and I'm going to animate it moving from up through the planet like that. So let me go back to this. Yeah, so if we look at this, we get something like that. Why is it not in the center? That's okay. Anyway, so we have that. I can bring that in, so this cube here, and use a set position around here. Also make sure this is set to relative, and use a geometry proximity to create a mask that will push these fractures down. So if I use a combine XY and just add a negative offset, you see everything is falling down, but I will just want only the parts that are close to this. So I can get the distance, use a vector math here, use a scale property, and just use this distance to scale everything. Now we're getting the opposite of what we want, so I'm going to use a car ramp and just flip this around, and we get a collapsing planet really easily. I can just, yeah, you can determine how much of this you want. Yeah, something like that. That's perfect. Now, another thing you will notice in my original version, the pieces are somehow rotating as well. So let's add that effect as well. To do that, we're just going to come here after the set position and add another set position. I'm going to use the position and the cross product, so of the Z component. So let's do that. Cross product. If we put that into the offset, these particles rotate, but right now they're going really fast. So I can just scale this down quite a bit, or just reduce this component. 0.1. Now you can see now we have those pieces rotating, but everything is rotating. So what we can do, another thing we could do is just again use this proximity map to determine what parts rotate. And again, it's flipped, so I'm going to flip that, and you can see we have that nice rotation. Okay, let's work now on the materials. If you set up your cell fracturing correctly, you can go to the fractures, look at one, and they should have two materials. And if we go to the materials, we should see that the interiors have a different material. Let me just give it a nice blue color. You can see that the interior of the fracture is a different color than the exterior. And can go back to these and let's look at that. So, okay, but because in geometry nodes, if you use the simulation zone, it kills the materials you have set up. We are going to set up some new materials. So I'm going to, let me change this to shader. I'm going to use my texture folder add-on, which just helps me to bring in textures. So I'm going to look for PBR textures that I have that are related to rock. So I'm going to get this and just use it on this. Let me call this rock. You can see it's still not applied to the surface because in geometry nodes, you have to apply the material directly in geometry nodes. So yeah, let's do that first. I'm going to use a set material and I'll just bring in the rock. Now you can see what we have. I don't like how the UVs look, so I'm going to go back to my original shells, select everything, go to edit mode and use cube projection. Go to UV editor. This is what we get for the UVs, and let's use that instead. Yeah, I think that's better. So I can come back to the shader editor here. Perfect. Now we can create another material. I'm going to call this lava, or for the inside. And this, you can go to Google and download a lava image, or you can create your own procedure lava. I'm just going to use this. So for this, if we preview this, we don't really see anything because we have to apply that material to see it. So I'm going to use another set material here. And this time, let's call this lava. Now, to make sure that it's being assigned to the inside parts, I can use a select material selection node. First things first is make a selection. So I'll use a material selection node, and what we want to select is the inside material that we had. So if I look at this, you can see that the inside are getting a different material, and I can capture this or use a store named attribute and store it in a variable called surface or inside, whatever you want to call it. This should be a boolean and this should be our value. Now if we come outside our simulation zone, we should be able to see that here. So I can use now a set material. I can use a set material and use a named attribute. It should be inside. If you don't see it here, just move back to your timeline a few frames and you should see that. So that should be it, and we can use lava for the inside. Perfect. And for the outside, we can use rock, and it's just going to be the opposite of this selection. So I am just using a boolean math with the operation not, just like that. Okay, so we have this. Perfect. We can start setting up the different layers. I'll make sure this is the final output. And the weird thing about this is that though we made it facing up, we can rotate it. Let's go back to our original setup when we are seeing even this here. Just parent this to something like an empty, including this ball here. So just parent everything to the empty like this. Now I can rotate it in any direction I want. And yeah, we have step one done. Now we can start adding in extra layers. I can add in a UV sphere. Just put it above the sphere, just like this. And here, I'm just going to add another empty right about there. Let me just use a sphere like that, and I just reduce its display size about there. And now we are done with geometry nodes. We just need to work on materials. So let me go to the shader editor and use a 3D viewer here. And I can preview my results here in cycles, make this darker, and maybe add some lighting, use an area light. just like that. So we're going to add some dirt and wave and then a layer of the earth. So let's create a new material. I can use this image, so I'll just import it in. Let's look at that. Can scale it a bit. And I can bring in another image. Let me use this. Switch this out. So we have something like that. And let's bring in another image. Just download an earth image like this, bring it in. This one, we're going to need to use a different UV map. So I'm going to set up a new UV map. Call it 1. And just go to front view, projection from view. And we can bring in our new UV map. So this is the second one. And just connect that there. And look at that. We have, okay, let me just do a projection from view just so that it's simple like this. Just scale this up. We have now 3 layers. We have this, we have the rock layer, the dirt layer, and maybe the last one should be the lava layer. So I'll bring in my lava, which this one can be object mapping. And just fade in the hash edges. So we have that, and we want to make the same transition effect we have here. That should be quite easy. So let's start with a gradient texture. It's going to be a sphere. If we preview this, we get that. But remember the object we added here. Let me first pin this. So remember this empty here. We want the gradient to use that as our center. So I'll use Ctrl T, change the coordinates to object, and use this empty as my coordinates. You can see, so wherever it is, that's where we're going to have the gradient. Now, if I animate the scale of this, you can see we get that nice transition. So I'm going to start out and go to frame 70, have it to about there. Select keyframe, go to frame 0. We have that. From there, we can add some noise because I don't want that clean gradient. So I can add some noise. Use a mix color, blend these two, and use a color dodge or color burn to just simply add some detail in the edges there. To make this more organic, I'm just also going to use another noise. At this time, this should go into the vector. I like this more squally wavy detail. So yeah, so now we get something like that. Now let's start layering these. This is going to be its own material, so it should be an emission like that, and it should be mixed with this, and this is going to be our factor. So let's see. We just need to invert. Actually, that's how it should be. I can use a color ramp to push this where I want. Actually, this should be inverted. Yeah, just like that. And now we can have multiple layers here. So we have 3 layers. This should be the last. So we start with this and this. So I'm going to just push these back a bit, blend them using a mix node, and grab a gradient or a ramp as the mixing factor. So this should be inverted. We have a layer of dirt, and then a layer of a rock, and then finally we can mix these with the final layer, which also needs its own gradient to be pushed back. So just put this and have this swapped. I can push this a bit further. If you see that it's not going any further back, we can push this a bit ahead So you can see the 3 different layers. So now the only thing we're left with is this. So this should go into the base, and we can put this further ahead. Need more contrast between these. Now I want this rock to look even darker, so I'll just use an RGB curves. One other thing we could do is, let's look at this. Yeah, we see the different layers, and I guess we can scale this even further. We need to push this rock material. Now, one last thing is we need to see the inside. So we're going to get a transparency shader, blend that, and bring this gradient, bring again this final gradient. Again, we're going to need another ramp. We need to swap these, and since we're using Eevee, I need to go to the material of this object. Make sure that we set this to alpha blend, just like that, and we need to push this so we can just see a tiny layer of lava. That can make this even more brighter, and we can turn on bloom if you want. Now it seems our animation comes in a bit later than the collapsing. Yeah, about there. So we can see the collapsing there. And I guess we can also go back to geometry nodes, and if you want this to explode away, we can add another set position here. Use the position, add it to the offset, and that way all the pieces will explode away. But we can control when they explode away by using a scale node. And if this is set to 0, we have the original animation, and maybe at around frame 40, we can animate this to explode. So I can just push this to 2. You can have that. And then at around this frame, you hide all the other this layer here. So let's go back to the shader editor. So at this frame, we can add a keyframe, and at frame 43, we can scale this to 0, so that it completely disappears. So just like that. Oh, another thing we can do, if you're using cycles, we can add this atmosphere. So this is our planet. You can come here and add another sphere. Let me just add a new material. This is going to be our atmosphere, so I'll just use principal volume. And it shows best in cycles. You don't need the density, we just need an emission value, just like that. Give it some color, just like that. You can see we have that, and it disappears. Since it has the same animation as the original object, it disappears after the explosion. But one other thing you can see is that the atmosphere doesn't disappear here. When it should. I guess another thing I should do, this should be scaled up so that is larger than the original planet. We don't want the atmosphere to show here. So what I can do is, since we already have this empty here, I can use that. Let's do texture coordinates, and bring in that. Again, we just use it for the gradient texture. It should be spherical. object. And I can use mapping here. Let's scale this down. One thing that I forgot is that this unmets, which I guess is not a problem. Yeah, it's okay. We can use this and use this as the strength, emission strength, but it should be inverted. So add a ramp and just flip this. So this also destroys the atmosphere, just adding another layer of detail to it. And for the foreground, because you don't want to just have a planet floating like that, you can just add a plane in the foreground, add it like this, and to cover a little bit. I'm going to use my texture library again, texture folders library again. I can use this. I'll just add the material directly to this. Look at that. Material already looks good. And I can add a displacement modifier. Doesn't have to be that big. I can add a subdivision surface above this. Then I'm going to use my asset library to import in a rock. Yes, can I just give it the same material? Let's give it that and give it a new hair system. Render object and render our rock. Random rotation, random, basically random everything. Can make just a few hundred. Let's call this one. Make another copy, create a third one, but of even smaller rocks. And we can add more depth to this. I'm just going to, by duplicating this rock surface, remove all the particle systems we have. Just give this a volume material, principal volume. Yeah, if you want to see how the fog was animated, you can just get the project file so you can see our smoke is moving and what. Yeah, the rest you can just take out the project files in the description. Yeah, basically that's how I did that.